Hey, my name is Eric Shavaz, and you're watching Chat GPT and Me. So today we're going to be discussing an interesting topic, which is we're going to discuss uh, are immigrants biased toward African Americans? And the reason that I want to discuss this today is not because I believe that immigrants are inherently bad or certain immigrants from certain countries are biased, but is there like an inherent psychological bias for any group or immigrant to come to this country and try to compare themselves to who they see as the lowest group in the country? And what I mean by lowest is historically because of basically a legacy of slavery. African Americans are caught them at the bottom of the barrel. Now, I know today we made a lot of strides, and some people might consider certain immigrant groups the bottom of the barrel. But from a perception perspective, when other groups come to this country, they see a lot of times white people and black people as the original people in this country. And when they see that, they see African Americans as the minority group historically who have always been kind of at the bottom of the power structure. So whether you're from India or Mexico or Latin America or Eastern Europe, when you come to this country, you're going to quickly assess the hierarchy. That's what any intelligent person does. And so what we're going to explore today is there type a inherent bias when you come to this country if you're an immigrant to want to associate with the winning group and kind of compare yourself to the lower group and start to structurally see, hey, maybe they're the lower group because they're weaker, they're not as smart, maybe they have bad habits. Is there some type of inherent incentive for an immigrant to disassociate themselves with African Americans and have kind of a bias or negative view toward African Americans? And we're going to be exploring this with ChatGPT to see some of the potential arguments. So let's first start off by asking ChatGPT what are some of the negative views that immigrants have about African Americans. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say about this topic, and then we'll discuss some of the ideals.
It is important to approach this question with sensitivity and caution, as generalizations about any group can perpetuate stereotypes and contribute to misunderstandings. However, it is worth noting that people's perceptions and attitudes can vary widely within immigrant groups, and it would be inaccurate to attribute specific generalizations to all members of a particular group. That being said, some immigrants might hold certain perceptions or stereotypes about African Americans based on limited exposure or preconceived notions. Some potential generalizations, although not universally applicable or accurate, could include stereotypes about behavior. Some immigrants may hold stereotypes about African Americans being loud, aggressive, or involved in crime. These stereotypes are unfounded and harmful, as they ignore the diversity and individuality of African Americans.
Okay, so let's discuss that first one about African Americans being loud, obnoxious, etc. Now, we know any intelligent person that the majority of African Americans cannot be generalized to be loud and obnoxious. So if you're an immigrant, right, where will you get these ideals if you don't live in America? Well, there's only one place you can get them. You can get them in the media. Now, the question is, if African Americans were controlling their media and they were in Hollywood and they had capital and they were making movies, would they intentionally basically dominate movies with negative stereotypes about themselves? Probably not. It's not in their best interest to do that. So if you think about it from a power perspective, and this is addressing a lot of these immigrants with these views, and if you're an immigrant or somebody from another country, I want you to consider this. If you were making movies about yourself and you're living in a country where you're a minority, would you go out your way to make a significant amount of movies perpetuating the worst of your culture? You wouldn't you? So use our logical brains here. If you wouldn't do that, then African Americans wouldn't do that either, which tells us other people are making these movies and they're choosing to highlight those things that they find funny or provocative that don't necessarily benefit African Americans. So the majority of movies in America are made by Jewish people, white people, and other people who control capital, the screenwriters, the investors. And so when they make these movies, usually these movies are written by non-black people and they cast black people in these movies. Yes, these movies are fun. Yes, these movies are provocative. Yes, these movies are entertaining. But when you make 1, 2, 3, 50, 70 movies like this and they're big blockbusters hits and they go all around the world and other cultures see them, and this is the only version of African Americans they're seeing, because typically when they make movies about lawyers and heroes, they're not black. So if these are the type of movies that people all around the world are seeing when they get here. Their instant perception, especially a lot of groups who are coming from other countries where the majority of the group in their country is their people. Keep that in mind as well, that most countries in the world, unlike America and Europe, are not as diverse as America. America is probably one of the most diverse countries in the world proportionally. So if you think about that, and I want a lot of immigrants out there to think about that, your perceptions of African Americans are coming from non-African Americans. And so think about the inherent bias built into the fact that you have movie producers, screenwriters, and people who are willing to fund movies only willing to fund movies about African Americans or make the lead of an African American perpetuating gangster rap, perpetuating crime, perpetuating being a criminal, perpetuating somebody being ghetto. African Americans, especially the best and most intelligent of us, are not making these movies and they're not funding these movies. And so think about that. Your perception of African Americans is driven by stuff that African Americans did not create and promote. So you need to really double check on your own biases. Why would an African American do this if it's not in their best interest? Most likely because they're not the one behind these movies.